Welcome! In this video on the causes of the Civil War, we will mainly continue our theme on westward expansion with reference to the Mexican War. Recall that our unifying theme of slavery in the federal territories as a chief cause of the Civil War is what we'll be always tying everything back to. In our table of contents, recall that we are on the topic of westward expansion, and this is particularly relevant because it will create a large new chunk of federal territory. The previous time this happened, with the Louisiana Purchase, they had the Missouri Compromise eventually that drew a line. That had settled the issue for about 20 years, 20 plus. Now with the added territory from Mexico, it would reopen this fierce debate on the subject of what to do with slavery in the federal territories. Last time we spoke about the annexation of Texas, how Texas won its independence from Mexico, and how many of the leaders of Texas independence were actually Americans who had immigrated to Mexico, to the Texas region of Mexico, in exchange for large grants of land. After having defeated the Mexican army, Texas became independent. But after a few years, leaders of the Lone Star Republic agreed to annexation toward the United States. Remember that a majority of a fair number of the people and a majority of the political class and some of the wealthy in Texas were themselves born in the United States and had affiliation with the U.S. and sought to be reunited with the United States. So by a simple majority, failing to get 2/3 of support from the Senate, getting a simple majority, Texas was annexed by the United States in 1845, bringing outrage to Mexico. The many in the Mexican government, including Santa Anna and other powerful Mexican interests, threatened war, said that if Texas were annexed by the United States, that would be seen as an act of war by the United States against Mexico. Well, it happens, and war does not break out immediately. Tensions were very high, however, when the United States had annexed Texas. And the United States military sent General, future president, but General Zachary Taylor with a contingent of the United States Army and some cavalry to build fortifications on the border with Mexico. Now, there was a series of disputes over what territory was what. See, the Texans in the United States claimed all of the territory as far south as the Rio Grande. Mexican government argued that the line between the two countries was much further north at the Nueces River. However, Zach Taylor built Fort Texas to defend Texas on the much further south Rio Grande River in territory that Mexico considered its own territory. So you have to picture this situation. If you're in the shoes of Mexico, Zach Taylor comes down into your country and begins building fortifications. So the Mexican cavalry crosses the river and scouts out the position. So Zach Taylor sends out American cavalry to go chase off the Mexican cavalry and keep an eye on them. Well, when you have two armies sort of in close proximity to one another, and both sides believe that the other side has illegally crossed the border and invaded their country. Mexico believes the U.S. is building a fort inside of Mexico, and the United States believes that the Mexican army has crossed the river and is surrounding Fort Texas. And so shots are fired and Americans are killed. There then springs up a debate in Congress. Americans and Mexicans are killed in kind of a skirmish near Fort Texas. Both sides report back to their government to decide what to do, right? Blood has been spilt in battle against the other. What's to be done? Future President Abraham Lincoln, current one-term Illinois representative, serving in his only other federal job that Lincoln ever held other than president, was 1 2-year term in the House. He happened to be there this time, and he introduced one of the few pieces of legislation he ever introduced while in the House, which were called the spot resolutions, which in the middle of the debate whether or not to declare war on Texas, Lincoln introduced the idea that a fact-finding commission should be sent to Fort Texas to determine if the place where this battle fought was in fact American soil or not. Because the battle cry of those who wanted war with Mexico was American blood spilt on American soil. And that was very inflammatory. If that was true, that is generally considered an act of war. And so Lincoln was among a group of Whigs who wanted to buy time and wanted to confirm this. And as they said, there's a time for thinking and a time for action, and this, in the eyes of many, was no time for thinking. So war was declared on Mexico. A very brief overview of the actual war itself. Zach Taylor, who was already in position to attack the large expanse of Mexico in the north, fought and won a battle at Buena Vista. The more numerous and modern American artillery played a large role, though both armies sort of fought well. Now there was less reliance on militia, but U.S. Army volunteers. The United States Army by now, in comparison, say, to 1812, actually had a meaningful-sized army and Marines. But in order to actually fight a war, they had to recruit tens of thousands of volunteers, people signing up, in the heat of the moment to go fight in this war. And actually, similar to the problems the United States had with militia in the past, volunteers were much less effective than the long-term regulars were. However, they still find success. But here's the thing. Mexico is quite large, and advancing through the north, it's very dry. There's no highways or railroads. And so keeping their supply lines intact is very difficult. So Zach Taylor defeats a major Mexican army at the Battle of Buena Vista, but it's hard to leverage that into actually winning the war because his army kind of bogs down and they're gradually advancing, but Mexico is very large and there's not good highways of attack. Out in the far west, General Kearny and others attack and lay siege to several Mexican, former Spanish missions, places in California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada. And in similar fashion to what the United States did against Britain when it came to the northern forts, by taking out these fortified positions in the west, even though none of them was particularly large, and General Kearny's army was quite small. Again, they had terrible issue with supply, even to supply themselves with water out in the west in these times. And so the fact that they took out the major Mexican forts and missions in that area is one of the things that will secure those states for the United States in the subsequent treaty. The kill shot, the death blow, comes with another general, General Winfield Scott, and in comparison to Zach Taylor's overland campaign, heading straight south from Texas into the vast northern reaches of Mexico, General Winfield Scott leads a Marine campaign from the sea to the land, landing at the main Mexican port of Veracruz, and they seize this city quickly and march the little over 100 miles or so from Veracruz to Mexico City. And so landing behind where some of the main Mexican defenses were, they lay siege to the same area where actually Montezuma was defeated by the Spanish hundreds of years before with the siege of Chapultepec, and force the Mexican government itself to surrender. This is that second part of that famous Marine Corps hymn. We already talked about the Barbary Pirates, how it speaks about that first line is from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. And those are two of the most famous early campaigns of the United States Marine Corps, earning some glory with a victory and taking Mexico City in 48. All of this leads to negotiations over the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the treaty that ends the war in 1848 between the United States and Mexico. And what they come up with is the massive Mexican cession that these states listed above, not only Texas, but all of the disputed territory in Texas, the states of California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, part of Colorado, of several states, all about a third, between a half and a third of all of what was then Mexico is ceded or given from Mexico to the United States. Now, the United States paid Mexico, I believe, $15 million, something similar to what the United States paid for the Louisiana territory. Still a very, per acre, that was a very small amount, though $15 million was a lot at the time, added to the debt. But, so the United States compensated Mexico in exchange for a huge chunk of land referred to as the Mexican cession. But for our purposes, in the context of the causes of the Civil War, the most interesting factor coming out of the Mexican War is what will be that role of slavery, hearkening back to our four possibilities. Will slavery be banned in all of the territory gained from Mexico? Will slavery be guaranteed? Will we draw a line? Will we continue the old Missouri line? Or will they draw a new line? Or will they dodge the issue entirely? Will each territory decide for themselves? A position soon to be known by its author, Stephen Douglas. What will happen? That will be our main theme going forward. One bit of ominous news was the Wilmot Proviso. Okay. Early in the process, a House member by the name of David Wilmot made a provision or a proviso, tried to pass a resolution through Congress stating that if we happen to take any territory from Mexico in this war, slavery would be banned in all of it. This proviso passed the House. Remember that now the House is dominated by people from northern states. That Northerners, with its greater population, now far outstrip Southerners in the House, and this anti-slavery proviso passed the House and was defeated narrowly in the Senate, which is much more evenly represented in North and South because it evenly represented states, you see. And so this, again, it did not pass, it failed, much like that Talmadge Amendment that tried to do something similar in Missouri. So you see there are abolitionists, there are those who oppose slavery beginning to see this new territory as a slavery issue even before the war ends. So we'll pick up next time on that theme of westward expansion as a cause of the Civil War, and we'll look at the election that immediately follows the war and how the issue of slavery in the federal territories becomes a dominant issue in national politics for the next decade. Thanks for watching.